Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Stevens with a lecture on subject and theme in poetry. And I'm going to approach this subject in a very simple way by going through the poem Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold, which you see on your screen, and simply talking about how we can determine what the subject is. I don't have any general method for determining the subject of a poem. I think that this is something that is fairly intuitive whenever you read anything, whether it's a newspaper article, whether it's a blog on the internet, a magazine, whatever it might be. It's natural to be able to identify whatever it is you're reading, what it is about, and the theme. By subject, we simply mean, what is this thing, whatever it is I'm reading, what is it about? Theme means, in general, what is this particular thing that I'm reading saying about this subject? So I'm treating that as something that comes naturally to any kind of reader. And so rather than giving you a general method for finding the subject and theme of a poem, I'm just going to read through this poem on the assumption that if you follow along and you see what I'm doing, you'll be able to do this for yourself. So let's begin simply by reading through the poem, and as I do this, try to make notes on what you see as being the subject, and then notes on wherever you think the subject might actually be changing. And then if at any point you note a particular theme, that is, a particular attitude toward the subject that the speaker has, or a particular point that the speaker wants to make about that subject, then take note of that. So, Dover Beach, you can see it on your screen. If you don't have a copy of it in front of you, get a copy from your textbook, or get a copy from where it might be posted on Blackboard. Have that copy in front of you so that you can make notes on it. Here we go. Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. And by the way, if you see a picture accompanying this lecture, that is a picture of the actual Dover Beach. Dover Beach is a real place on the southeast coast of England. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand, glimmering and vast, out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window. Sweet is the night air. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon-blanched land, listen. You hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high strand, begin and cease, and then again begin with tremulous cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Sophocles, long ago, heard it by the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. We find also in the sound a thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world, which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. So, what about subject then? Could you get any sense of what the speaker here is talking about? Let's go through it. The sea is calm tonight. Line 1. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand, glimmering and vast, out in the tranquil bay. 5 lines, it looks as though the subject is the scenery, the landscape, right? The sea, with the full tide and the moon and the cliffs of England and all of those things. It looks as though we've got a poem about the landscape. We've got a poem that is describing something, as if the subject were going to be the sea and the cliffs and so on. Okay? But then he continues, come to the window. Sweet is the night air. Well, the speaker is introducing somebody, right? He's calling somebody to the window. So we know then, that this is something important. It doesn't necessarily change the subject, but it introduces an important point, which is that the speaker is not alone because he's saying to somebody, come, right? The imperative, when we say, hey, come here, right? We're telling somebody to do something, right? All right? Hey, come here this instant, you. Or, come to dinner, everyone. We are issuing a command. We're in the imperative mode, so we're talking to somebody, right? Okay, so there is somebody else in this scene beside the speaker. All right, and then the speaker continues. Okay, it seems as though he's continuing his description, but he says only as if he were taking exception to something. Okay, so we've got the long line of spray. All right, that's part of the description. He's still describing the ocean, right? The sea, the spray from the waves. Okay, and it's the waves where the sea meets the moon-blanched land. Okay, the sea meeting the shore. Moon-blanched means that the white moonlight is making the land seem white. Okay, as it does in the light of the full moon. Okay, and then he says, listen. Again, the imperative again. He's telling whoever it is he's talking to listen to something. Okay, now we're going from what we can see to what we can hear. What can we hear? The grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw black and fling at their return up the high strand. Okay, so he's describing the sound of the waves now on the beach. Okay, and if you've been to the beach, you know what kind of grating roar the waves can make, especially if instead of fine sand on the beach, you have pebbles, right? So the waves come up and they crash against the waves and they crash against the pebbles and they draw the pebbles back. And then when the waves come in again, they fling the pebbles back up on the strand and so on. All right, so still description of the sound. Now, continues with the sound, begin and cease, and then again begin with tremulous cadence slow and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Oh, cadence, all right. Tremulous cadence. He is comparing the sound of the waves to cadences in music, the rhythms of music, and they are tremulous. That is, they are trembling in some way. But note then, okay, note that he introduces a different subject here, doesn't he? It has seemed up to this point as though he's describing the setting. He's asking somebody to look at the setting with him and listen to it. All right? So we've had description of what things look like. We've had description of what things sound like. But now we've got this abstract thing, sadness. The waves are bringing in an eternal note of sadness. So we say, oh, well, the subject is not just a description of the landscape, is it? All right, the subject somehow is also including this idea of sadness. So we go on. Sophocles, long ago, heard it on the Aegean, and it brought it what? What does it refer to? It is a pronoun. A pronoun must have an antecedent. There must be something that has already been mentioned that the pronoun is referring to. All right, and the only thing that it could possibly refer to, it can't refer to Sophocles because Sophocles is hearing it, right? So if Sophocles is not, doesn't mean Sophocles is hearing himself. So it must be this eternal note of sadness. So Sophocles. Now you may or may not know that Sophocles is one of the great ancient Greek tragedians, all right, writers of tragic drama, famous for his play Oedipus. All right, you may or may not know that, but you know that we're talking about somebody a long time ago heard it, that is the eternal note of sadness, on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of misery. The Aegean is another ocean. All right? So we've come now to two things that we might not be familiar with, Sophocles and Aegean. We can always look them up. Okay, everything else up to this point is familiar, right? We know French coast, we know about France and cliffs of England, we know about England, and we know about oceans and tides and waves and beaches and so on. All of those things are familiar. Sophocles and Aegean, well, if you don't know what they are, look them up. Aegean is the ocean around the country of Greece. All right, well, that's in relation to England. The Aegean Sea is to the south and to the east. Okay? Now, Sophocles, who wrote tragedies about human misery, okay, heard, the speaker is speculating, all right? He's speculating that this eternal note of sadness, which seems to be our new subject, okay, eternal note of sadness, in the ocean is something that Sophocles would have heard. Okay? And Sophocles was reminded by the sadness in the sound of the ocean. He was reminded of human misery. Okay. We already know that there's a we here because there's a speaker and at least one other person that he's talking to. All right, and it could be we in general also. We in our own time. Sophocles lived a long time ago, right? 1500, nearly 2500 years ago at the time that Arnold is writing. Okay, so he lived a long time ago, but we in our own time find also in the sound a thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. Okay, distant northern sea meaning distant from and farther north than the Aegean Sea. Well, we can follow this so far. We know that the speaker has introduced the subject of the surrounding landscape, the sea and the cliffs and so on. He has now introduced the subject of sadness, along with the sadness of human misery, and now he seems to be introducing a third subject, which is this thought, whatever this thought is. Okay, now, before we go on, notice the it again. Sophocles heard it, meaning the eternal note of sadness, and we hear it, the eternal note of sadness, standing here by this distant northern sea, which is the English Channel in this particular case, right? Okay. What is the thought? Okay? Sophocles had the thought of human misery. We already are hearing something that reminds us of sadness. Sadness can be the sadness of human misery. What is the thought? The thought is this: the sea of faith was once two at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. That's the thought. Okay, he has told us now. Follow the changes in subject here. And the changes aren't necessarily going from one subject to another, but they're developing from the scenery to the sound of the sea to the idea of sadness, which the sea reminds the speaker of, to Sophocles hearing the note of sadness, to that note reminding him of human misery, to its prompting a thought of our own, and that thought is simply that the sea of faith was once two at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. Okay, what does he mean? This is a metaphor, the sea of faith. Well, faith is not an ocean, right? Faith is the belief in something and the trust that something exists and that something will fulfill certain promises and meet our expectations. That's what faith is. It's an abstraction. It names a certain phenomenon. Okay, it's not an ocean, but we've got a metaphor here. Okay, the ocean here is a metaphor for faith. Now, faith is capitalized, and so is sea. So let's suppose that Matthew Arnold, as an Englishman, and most likely then in the 19th century when he lived, a Christian, that we're talking about religious faith, the sea of religious faith. Let's, for the sake of argument, okay, assume that he's talking about that. Now, what does he mean? Was at the full. He's talking about the ocean here. This is part of the metaphor, right? Remember, our metaphor is sea. The metaphor is a metaphor. The sea is a metaphor for faith. All right? So the sea was at the full. Okay, that particular expression means full tide. Oh, that goes back to the very beginning of the poem, doesn't it? Okay, where we are told that the tide, the literal tide of the English Channel, is full, right? So the sea of faith was at high tide. And it was around the earth's shore, again, continuing that ocean metaphor, right? And it lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. Girdle in this case simply means something like a belt or a sash, anything that goes around something the way a belt goes around your body, right? Okay, that's all girdle means here. Girdle means to surround. And so what are we saying? The sea of faith went all the way around the earth, and it was bright, okay, and it was folded around the earth. So at one time, faith was everywhere. Now, the metaphor is the ocean. The ocean is high tide. The ocean is all the way around the earth. What does that mean? Okay, that means that faith at one time was full. Okay, everybody believed, right? And it was everywhere. It was all the way around the world. Okay, the religious faith we're talking. We move on, don't we? Okay, there's more to this thought. First part of the thought was the sea of faith was once full. Religion was once everywhere. Okay, that's the first part of the thought. So our subject now has become faith. Okay, religious faith. We go from the landscape to sadness, to Sophocles and human misery, to the thought of faith. Okay, so the subject now is faith. Our first point about faith is simply that once it was everywhere, right? Okay, everybody believed. And then the speaker goes on, but now I only hear its melancholy, long, withdrawing roar. More of the metaphor then, okay? The subject is still religious faith. He has not changed the subject, but he's using that metaphor of the ocean to say something about religious faith. He is saying it's, okay? What is its? Antecedent again. Its is the sea of faith. Okay, back to his ocean metaphor. Its is the sea of faith, okay, and it is withdrawing. The ocean is withdrawing, okay? We know from the very first part of the poem what this withdrawing refers to, don't we? It refers to those waves that are pulling back from the beach, okay? Where it says, the grating roar up here. Let's go back to this, okay? The grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back. Okay, so we've already had a reference to the withdrawing roar. Now that is literal. Up here, this is a literal description of an actual physical scene. The speaker is standing there on the cliffs of Dover at the beach, looking at it, describing the actual physical place. But down here, all of a sudden the ocean, the sea, has become metaphorical, and the ocean now is withdrawing. Okay, and we apply this metaphor then to faith. And so what are we saying? That faith is withdrawing. It is retreating. Okay? Faith once was at full tide. Now the tide of faith is going out. Now faith is leaving us. It is retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. More of the metaphor of the ocean. Okay, the ocean with the night wind over the ocean, the edges of the world, the edges of the ocean, right? Naked shingles. Shingle is another word for beach. Okay, a particular kind of beach that's made up of small pebbles. Okay, so we've got the metaphor of the ocean throughout this particular stanza. Right? Follow me? The metaphor of the ocean, but the ocean metaphor then is being used to describe the retreating of faith, meaning faith is retreating, it's leaving. Faith is leaving the way the tide, when it goes out, leaves the beach high and dry. What about subject then? Well, you can see the sequence, right? From description of the landscape to the note of sadness, something to do with sadness, and then to Sophocles hearing that note of sadness, and then the speaker and those around him, we people in general, hearing in that note of sadness the thought of the sea of faith. So the subject then has finally come down to religious faith. And what the speaker wants to say about faith then is being developed in terms of this metaphor of the sea. And so what is he saying? What is his theme? His theme is the withdrawing or the retreating of faith. All right? He seems to be saying that we human beings, we no longer have the same kind of religious faith that we used to. Okay? So his subject, religious faith, his theme, the phenomenon or the experience perhaps of faith leaving us. So how does he conclude this final stanza? Ah, love. Okay? Seems as though he's back talking to that person he was with in the first stanza. Okay? And this person is a love of some kind. Perhaps his sweetheart, perhaps his wife. We don't know exactly. But he's referring to somebody as his love. And so the common use of that word love in that concept is to refer to a lover or a sweetheart or a wife and so on. Okay? So, or a husband or a partner. Okay? Somebody that you love. Let us be true to one another. This is what he's thinking now. Okay? We've got this subject, religious faith, and we've got this idea that faith is leaving us. We no longer have faith. What are we going to do? So the subject then doesn't leave faith behind, religious faith. It doesn't leave behind, but it's adding another subject, which is what do we do in this situation in which we no longer experience religious faith? So this is what we're going to do. Let's be true to one another, okay? Because the world, which, looks like a beautiful place, right? This world, it really doesn't have any joy. It doesn't have any love. It doesn't have any light. It doesn't have any certainty. It doesn't have any peace. When we're in pain, there's no help for us, okay? Instead of all of this land of dreams, beautiful, joyful, loving, light, and so on, instead of this, what we have is simply a darkling plain, meaning a great, vast, open space in the dark. And on this darkling plain, what do we have? Do we have people enjoying football? No. Night game of baseball, perhaps? Maybe a dance out there on the lawn? No. What we have is we have struggle and flight. People struggling with something and fleeing, flight, trying to run away from something. Because we have ignorant armies clashing. And that's all we've got. All right. So the subject of poetry and what is being said about that subject. As you read through a poem, I said I wasn't going to give you any general method, and I'm not really giving anything in detail, but simply to summarize, as you read through a poem, summarizing what we've done, as you read through a poem, simply note what it's about, but pay attention to, number one, what it is saying about whatever it is about, and how that develops during the course of the poem. By the time you get to the end of Dover Beach, you can no longer say, oh, it's a poem about the ocean, how beautiful the ocean is and what it sounds like. No. Okay, it starts out like that. Okay? Nor can you say, oh, it's about the sadness of life. Okay, well, sure, that's part of it, but it's not just that, is it? And so by the time we get to the subject of faith, we know that it's the sadness of losing faith, when we're talking about eternal note of sadness, and we also see, oh yeah, that's why Matthew Arnold begins with the ocean. He is not simply describing an actual ocean. He's going to use that ocean as a metaphor for what happens when we no longer experience religious faith. Well, in conclusion, let me say that if you are a religious person, I certainly hope that you haven't lost your own religious faith. Matthew Arnold, late Victorian poet, late 19th century, did struggle with the issue of religious faith. And this is one of the things that he has to say about it. The subject of poetry, subject and theme. I hope this has helped you a little bit with the idea of how to determine subject and theme. So I thank you for listening, and I look forward to reading what you have to say about this online.